Good morning and welcome into the Pacers Podcast Show. I'm Kyle Newman, your host.
And I'm Rhett Hensley, your co-host.
We have a great lineup for the next 45 minutes. We will discuss the Pacers' last 5 games, chat about Paul George's short season, and recap Indiana's 2014-2015 season. We apologize for the technical difficulties once again last night. Show should have been up. We are hoping next week it will be on track. We have some exciting things coming with the show in the future, an hour length. We will be getting it up to YouTube eventually, so stick with us, tune in. Should be good stuff. Rhett, 8th Pacers Podcast Show. It's great to have you back 2 months in.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.
You're welcome. Good stuff. All right, well, let's get into this first segment here and talk about the Pacers' last 5 games. So on April 8th at New York, in the final matchup of the year, the Pacers had no trouble, winning big 102-86. Indiana completed the sweep of the Knicks this season 4-0. The old rivals swept. George Hill led the way for the Pacers with 20, followed by C.J. Miles with 13. Langston Galloway led the Knicks with 19. This was a game where the Pacers were on track, clicking on all cylinders, fundamentally sound, no problem, on the road at Madison Square Garden. What did you see in this game?
Yeah, there's not really much to say. They came out and took care of business. George Hill had 20 points. Another great night for him. C.J. Miles didn't play great. He only had around 13. But still double-digit numbers. Wes Cole and Hibbert, 11 points. So there's great team ball, and they were playing the Knicks. So there's really, I would hope so.
No kidding.
I would hope so.
Well, the Pacers shot 49% from the field to the Knicks 35%. Big difference there. Like I said, the Pacers shot well from the free throw line. Fundamentally, the only problem was turnovers. They had 17 turnovers to the 11 for the Knicks. But another big factor in this game that I saw, points in the paint, 50 for Indiana to New York's 22. That is a huge difference, along with 54 total rebounds for the Pacers to the Knicks' 34. So if you win most categories like that on the road, you are going to get a win, and that is what the Pacers got. So solid win there as they closed out the season sweeping New York. Okay, well, how about 2 nights later at Detroit in the final matchup of the season? The Pacers found a way to win, 107-103. An exciting game this was.
What a nail-biter.
It was. Detroit playing Indiana tough this year as Indiana split the season series 2-2 against the Pistons. C.J. Miles and Rodney Stuckey both led the way for the Pacers with 24 points each in this one. And Reggie Jackson led Detroit with 21. This was a game where Rodney Stuckey really gave it to his old team, and C.J. Miles was on fire. That man can shoot some threes. What did you see in this game?
Well, one thing that was key was free throws made. The Indiana Pacers shot 91% from the free throw line, 20 for 22, and the Pistons shot 12 of 23, 52% from the free throw line, and that is definitely going to cost you a game, as you can see by the score. If they would have knocked more free throws down, they would have won that game.
No doubt.
Yeah, that was one thing that stuck out to me. And then, it was great three-point shooting for the Indiana Pacers, 58%. So, which they are. Sorry, what was that?
To the Pistons, 48%. So, absolutely, even though Detroit shot well, they attempted a little bit more, but Indiana hit them at the right time. And then also, free throws, like you said, was a huge difference. So, fundamentally, you're solid there, and Indiana turned the ball over less, 10-11.
They had 29 assists, the Indiana Pacers did. That is a great assist number.
It is.
But, also Detroit had 25 assists. So it was really just close stats all around, except free throws and 3 points made. So
that's right. And Indiana took advantage of that, came back. Sharp shooting from Rodney Stuckey and C.J. Miles led to another Pacers win. 3 in a row to this point, so the Pacers were moving on and looking pretty.
One thing Stan Van Gundy said was, talking about Rodney Stuckey, he said, he hasn't done much of anything against us in our first 3 games this year, but today he killed us.
Put it out there perfectly. That's right. That's what he did. I love hearing that from old Stan. Very true, though. He did give it to his old team, so another good win there for the Pacers, much needed as they were trying to make this playoff push. The Thunder, 2 nights later at Bankers Life, final matchup of the season. The Pacers continued their winning ways with a big 116-104 win. Indiana evened the season series against the Thunder 1-1. C.J. Miles led the blue and gold with 30, followed by George Hill with 19. Russell Westbrook had a career-high 54 points to lead Oklahoma City. Rhett, this was an insane game. Really, it was the one-man show from Russell Westbrook who seemed to single-handedly bring the Thunder back and keep them in the game earlier, but the Pacers just had great team basketball. C.J. Miles was a sharpshooter once again, and they outlasted them at home. What did you see in this game?
Well, I think Russell Westbrook put the dagger in themselves by turning it into a one-man show instead of a team play. So that helped the Indiana Pacers right there. And, Kevin Durant being out also helped. But they weren't going to give up. They fought hard. C.J. Miles, 30 points. What a great game by him. And, you just can't stop Russell Westbrook, but one man just cannot do it for the whole team.
No.
And, that's one thing that helped the Indiana Pacers out. He took 43 shots?
Yes.
Hit 21?
Yes, that's a lot of attempts, and that brings me to that stat. 18 team assists for the Thunder to the Pacers 25. So big difference there in sharing the ball, and not to mention the fact that Indiana was 50% from downtown, which helped a lot, and the Thunder were only 39%. So you look at the overall field goal percentage, the Pacers shot 53% to the Thunder 43%, and that's kind of the Thunder's team numbers there. Year in and year out, they shoot a ton of shots. They're either making them or they're not, and it's usually Russell Westbrook that's doing that, and it kind of is doing them in, certainly this year, but the Pacers took advantage of that and took advantage of the rebound category, winning that 52-43. So
also,
really, the one issue you saw in this game where you might have looked at it and thought, oh boy, the Pacers lost this if you didn't watch it, if you just looked at the stats, the Pacers did turn the ball over 13 times to the Thunder 8, and the Pacers, really it would just be that category right there, is the turnovers.
So, let me point this out really quick, too. The Oklahoma City shot 39% from the free throw line. 39%.
Not going to get
11 of 28.
Right, not going to get it done.
It's not that the Indiana Pacers shot too much better. They shot 22 of 35, 63%. Right. But, oh my goodness, it's back to the fundamentals the game. People knock down free throws.
Fundamentals.
Goodness.
You hit it right on it. All right, well, it was a good win for the Pacers, much needed as they were 2 games at this point, 2 games away from seeing themselves in the playoffs once again. 2 nights later, home again against Washington in the final matchup of the season. The Pacers won a thriller, 99-95. Indiana squared the season series against the Wizards 2-2. C.J. Miles once again led the Pacers with 25, followed by George Hill with 24. Marcin Gortat and Bradley Beal led Washington with 19 each. Right, this was a game of George Hill and C.J. Miles combining for 49 points. Sharp shooting. C.J. Miles once again. This was an interesting game, though, because Indiana started out awful in this one, but were able to claw and fight themselves back into this game.
Started out awful.
So what did you see?
The middle was awful, and really the finish was awful, but they were able to pull it out in overtime.
Double.
Not
overtime.
One overtime. Double
overtime. It was a heck of a game.
Which is impressive, but it was one of the sloppiest games I have seen from the Indiana Pacers. And, George Hill almost had a triple-double again. 1 rebound shy of that. C.J. Miles, 8 rebounds, 25 points. C.J. Miles is starting to become a sharp shooter for the Indiana Pacers, and that's a good thing that they signed him for 3 years because he will be a lethal weapon.
I agree he will, but you said it. Pacers, 38% shooting from the field, 30% from downtown, 59% from the free throw line, and they turned the ball over 15 times. Most of the time, you won't win games with stats like that, but in this case, they got back to their defensive identity, and Washington didn't do much better.
They had 2 fast break points. 2. That's Washington had 16 fast break points. So basically you can see that they were pretty much not getting stopped off that rebound.
No.
Or off the turnover. So
not at all. Not at all. Well, in the end, Indiana did get their 6th win in a row in a close game, in a game that they needed to win. They lost that one, and that most likely was their season, so they kept it alive. And it all came down to last night's game at Memphis in the last matchup of the year against the Grizzlies. Perfect timing there. Indiana dropped a must-win game, losing 95-83. The Pacers finished the season 0-2 against Memphis. C.J. Miles led Indiana with 26. Marc Gasol couldn't be stopped, hit everything, and led the Grizzlies with 33. The Pacers lost their first game of the season wearing the FloJo jerseys, finishing 7-1 with them. Rhett, this game was a frustrating one, to say the least. Fundamentals was the biggest issue in this one, but how about the big men down low for the Pacers not being able to stop the big men for the Grizzlies? Unbelievable. What did you see in this one?
Well, they couldn't be stopped down low. Really, I thought everybody was hitting. Every shot that I was watching, the Grizzlies were making. And every time the Indiana Pacers made a shot, started pulling closer, they would just go down this court, and it didn't even matter if the Indiana Pacers were playing good defense, tipped the ball away. Somehow that ball went directly to a Grizzly, and they would, I saw it countless times, a turnaround jump shot and just drops.
That's right. I 2 categories stick out to me, and it goes along with it. The men could not be stopped down low. Points in the paint, 48 for the Grizzlies to the Pacers 32. Rebounds, 36 for the Pacers to the 48 for Memphis. It's just not going to get it done. That's their identity. And the thing is, the Pacers hung around in this game. I was talking to you last night. How many times did it seem like Indiana was down by just 10 points, a couple possessions here and there, a couple stops, they get together, and it's a one-possession game, and they just could not do it. It seemed like C.J. Miles and George Hill were the only players that showed up for Indiana. Rodney Stuckey kind of got it going a little bit, but a little bit too late. What do you think about that?
Well, the thing that stuck out to me was Roy Hibbert having 4 rebounds.
Oh, Roy Hibbert.
Oh, my gosh.
This was a game that unfortunately ended the Pacers season, and you know what? A lot of people are going to have their eyes on Roy Hibbert this offseason because he did not have a good game. really
Yeah.
played soft, it seemed.
Yeah, he was a really big pansy down below, and you know he couldn't hold on to the ball. He couldn't grab a rebound. That a 7'2" big man that weighs around 240, 250 can't stay on his feet. Just gets shoved around by a lot smaller people than him. He just needs to take a seat.
I guess so. You would think so. That would be what needs to be done. We will see as the off season is unfortunately now here for the Pacers. Okay, well, thanks to the Nets winning against the Magic, Pacers losing, their season is over. So let's transition into the second segment here and chat about Paul George's short season and break down each game and what we saw in his minutes. Rhett, we know that he started out getting between 10 to 15 minutes. He was going to be limited to that. I know Pacers fans in general were just happy to see the man come back to play for this team. And he looked good. He looked good in the games that he played in.
Sure did.
That Miami game, if you look back at that Miami game, which you went to.
Yes.
He played 15 minutes. He shot 5 of 12 from the field, hit 3 3-pointers, and finished with 13 points, which was the most in his 6 games that he played this season. So a solid return for him, and he hit his first shot of the season that he attempted. So a good start for Paul George there, got his minutes limit.
He got exactly 15 minutes on that one for his first game back.
He did. And then a few nights later, as we go through the games, at New York, he played his second to most minutes this season with 16. And this was a game where he really struggled. He shot 2 of 7 from the field, only hit 1 3-pointer, and finished with 10 points. But nonetheless, he was getting his minutes, trying to get his legs under him. So you saw him, and what mattered the most up until this Memphis game is that the team was getting W's. So even though we'll talk about what we think the minute situation should have been like or how that played out, the Pacers were getting wins, which was good. So 2 nights later at Detroit, he played 14 minutes, so you saw a little decline here. Shot 50% from the field, hit 2 threes, finished with 10 points again, so pretty good game there in his limited minutes. 2 nights later, home against the Thunder, 14 minutes once again, and this was one of his worst games back. Besides the Memphis one, as far as points, his lowest points scored in his return, 8. Well, second lowest because of his injury in the Memphis game, but he scored 8 points in this game, went 3 of 9 from the field, hit 1 3-pointer. So this was a game where he struggled a little bit, but again, the Pacers didn't really need him in the end because the Pacers came through with the W thanks to C.J. Miles. So 2 nights later, against the Wizards at home, he got his most minutes played, 18, went 4 of 10 from the field, 50% from downtown, and finished with 10 points, not to mention the big jump shot that he hit at the end of the game. So you saw Paul George's minutes kind of roller coaster in that, had another good game there, and then last night against the Grizzlies, tough game. He played 15 minutes, struggled, went 1 of 5 from the field, and finished with 2 points in his worst performance out there. However, at the end of the game, he did get injured. It was a left calf injury. Looked a lot more serious than it was at first. You saw that and you had to think, oh no, did he re-injure the same leg? But he didn't. It was his other leg, and it was a calf injury. Rhett, you saw some things posted about that. What did you see?
Well, a lot of people thought it was his knee because that's what he actually was grabbing at the beginning. And then he got carried off the court but it ended up getting confirmed that it was his calf. So that was that was a upside to that, but also before the game, actually during the game, the announcers were talking about how he had a lump on his leg that he broke, and it was bruised up. So that's what really brought the concern to us when he was actually out there holding his legs, and so that was one of the things that actually made me nervous hearing about that, because they were talking about that quite a bit throughout the game.
They were. And in a game where we were talking about this as we were watching it, up until that happens, it's unfortunate that it did, but the reality of it is he was been cleared to play. It was his 6th game back. He was healthy enough to play. Those things can happen. We've seen it with Derrick Rose numerous times. Luckily, it wasn't that serious, but he struggled in this game, and I know we were talking about how we thought that he wasn't playing enough as the Pacers needed to get that final push in the second half where it seemed they were down 10 so many times. Paul George wasn't in the game for a while, and I thought that was a time where he needed to be in the game, and the announcers were talking about it, of Paul George really needing to get it going. He only had 2 points. So what did you think in terms of how Vogel managed his minutes in this particular game?
Well, maybe he was thinking of not playing him just because of the lump on his leg. He was being cautious there. He didn't want to re-injure that leg. So
no, before that though? Before that, he had played 15 minutes. So up until that injury. Later in the game.
Later in the game. Are you asking how he played?
No, I'm asking how do you think his minutes were managed up until the injury? He played 15 minutes, but really did not come in until later in the second half.
Yeah, he didn't really come in until later in the second half. I think that he should have been in there more to support his team, to help them push. But like I was saying, Frank Vogel at the beginning of the game was probably cautious with playing him because of the lump on his leg.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yes, so that's what I was trying to say.
Pretty ugly lump, and that's what's tough about it, As fans, we saw, what was commented. We saw what we could see with him playing, and he looked good. He didn't look like the normal Paul George. He's not going to the rack like he usually would and slamming it, and you can see his discomfort. In fact, I noticed last night in the game he had a move where he tried a crossover, and the regular Paul George would have had that no problem, but he lost the handle. It's those things that you can see. He's just a little slower out there, and he's just being conservative as I think anyone would with that type of an injury. But if you recap his season, he played 6 games. He averaged 15 minutes per game. He averaged 37% from the field, 40% from downtown. Shot 73% from the free throw line, averaged about 4 rebounds per game and assists per game, and almost a steal per game, to average almost 9 points per game. So overall, Rhett, how do you think his short season went?
Well, I think that he had a nice little short season. It helped him to get his legs under his feet. So, he could have shot better, but, that's one thing. He's breaking the rust off. He's going to do that, continue to do that this summer. He said he's going to play for Team USA again. So I think they have mini camps, is that right?
Yeah.
This year? So he's going to be doing that. Rebounding, he did good. It was just mainly that stood out to me is, shooting-wise. Shot around 39%, I believe. Might have dropped since last night's game, but...
Yeah, 37%.
37%. Yeah, so he could have shot better, but that's really the main thing that stood out to me. Great rebounding. I saw his defensive play back, and that was one of the good things. that he always has had,
Great
and
defender.
hopefully we will continue to see that.
Absolutely. He is a great defender, and you saw some of that. And you look back at, I know we talked quite a bit of how during his games back we thought that he shouldn't have a minutes limit because he should play as much as he feels that he can play. But in the end, the Pacers were getting wins, so it may be more credible to talk about if the Pacers had lost the games, but they didn't. Now, I just said as far as I was out there. Now, again, they won the games, but if it were me, and we haven't experienced injuries to that level, but we are both athletes and we're athletic, right?
Yes,
we
yes.
play a lot of basketball and understand, and I have seen in person gruesome injuries like Paul George has sustained. And
Oh, yes.
it's something that crosses your mind when you're playing fast pace and you're taking a lot of contact and jumping and coming down on the legs constantly. I mean, it's something.
I remember when I came down to visit.
Yeah, it was
Remember?
not pretty.
Snapped his leg in half.
And that was
right
not
under
the
the
first time I've seen that. I've seen that twice in person in my life. So it's a scary thing, and it's something that crosses your mind. And I even think about it when I go up and to block a shot or a layup and come down. I mean, that's just human nature too.
Come on, Kyle. Blocking a shot, that's a lot of your range.
Yeah, well, dunking's out of your range too, Rhett, but it can't hurt to pretend.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where if it were me, I had to think that Paul George would be thinking the same way as coach. Put me in there. I'm cleared. Let me play as many minutes as I can and that I feel comfortable playing. I know we talked about that a lot as what we thought maybe should have been the situation. As you look back, we got the wins except last night, so it's just one of those things where you're glad you got the wins, but as far as his minutes situation, maybe they could have been increased more. But then again, the situation he was dealing with his leg, it was not a pretty one, and I'm sure there was plenty of discomfort. So I think in the end they were on top of his minutes situation in a pretty solid season. So what do you think, Rhett, with his minutes situation overall, as we talked about it earlier, during the season? Do you
the
still
first
believe
time.
he should have?
Well, I think that his minute situation to his problem that he had on his leg, that was the first time hearing about that. I don't know how long he's had that on his leg with the lump or anything like that. So Frank Vogel, I trust Frank Vogel, and it would have been a more of an issue if the Indiana Pacers would have been losing.
Right.
But I kind of agree with not putting him in if the team's actually winning. Don't want to mess anything up with that. Don't want to overstress him. Putting him in the Wizards game, that showed that he could go out there and do that. They extended that when the time was needed. So Frank put him in when I feel like he believed it was needed. So I think that he did manage the minutes pretty well on that aspect. So
Yes, and I can agree with that. And overall, I think it was a pretty successful short season. I look forward to what the old Paul George will have in store for Pacers fans come this fall. But the summer starts. It is the off season, and he's already talked about how he's ready to get to work and come back better than ever. And you have to love that from a guy who is just dedicated to coming back and staying healthy.
Yeah, hopefully he gains some more weight.
Right.
Gets that LeBron size.
Get that build, and make him even more of a threat, maybe, to come back and be an MVP candidate.
That could be something that could be in the future.
You never know.
Get back to that status.
He'll have all summer to try and heal up and get comfortable playing some ball and play some games. So a lot of exciting things to come for the Pacers. But Like we said, their season is over, and that's going to transition us into our last segment here as we need to recap Indiana's 2014-2015 season. They finished 38-44, 6 games under 500. They finished 23-18 at home. They finished 15-26 on the road. They were 7-3 in their last 10 games, really playing well, besides the tough loss last night to Memphis. Rhett, what do you think when you look back on the Pacers season this year of it? How did they do, in your mind, to just about make the playoffs?
Oh, my. Well, it was like a slip and slide all over the place. For being so inconsistent, like they were very inconsistent all year with winning, scoring, and everything like that. I mean, just like in the season, they would go on droughts, and even in games, they would go on big droughts, as we saw 0-10. That happened quite a bit. But, you know, for going on all those droughts, you know, they were still hanging in the playoffs. That shows you how bad the Eastern Conference is.
And it shows you how well the Pacers are coached.
Yes.
Because this team stuck together. Here's what I see when I look back on the season. Though I'm disappointed that the Pacers missed out on the playoffs, they controlled their own destiny and they blew it. The Pacers were without Paul George for 76 games. They were without George Hill for about 30. And they were without David West for about 20.
Yeah.
And they got in a hole early, but they kept fighting back. They kept fighting back, and 3/4 of the way through the season, they were so far under 500, you thought it was over. They were about 13 or 14 games under 500, thought that it was done, and they came back. They kept fighting. They got themselves into the playoff race. There was even talks when they were on their previous 6-game winning streak, not after losing last night, the one before that, where they were looking to get the 6th seed maybe.
Yeah.
The Bucks were falling. So this Pacers team was in the playoff race the past 20 games of this season, and I'm very impressed with their fight.
The thing is, at the beginning of the season, they had a bunch of young guns out there. So that's really, without George Hill, David West, and Paul George, that's one thing that kept them from, you know, excelling like they did with them back. So I think that, you know, it would have been a different story if George Hill, David West was back, and that's not even with Paul George. But you can't really win games if you have a bunch of people that, you know, haven't had to experience what George Hill and David West have. So you can't really put them in that type of situation and expect them to do great things. You know, they can't pull a Jeremy Lin or anything like that. So, I mean, they could, but the likelihood is very unlikely. So
It is. It's one of those things where, with all that they had going on, I thought that their fight was just impressive, and they were well coached. They got back to their defensive identity. Look, there's no doubt that this team, it was a roller coaster this year, but to finish 6 games under 500, considering the circumstances, I think is a pretty successful season.
Reminded me type of the Bulls, like how when Derrick Rose was out, they were expected to not play great, but they came out and showed people that they could still play. I remember us actually talking about that, Kyle. They stuck to their defensive identity. The Bulls are a hard team, and they, just like the Indiana Pacers, they stuck to their defensive identity, and they were still able to go out and show up some teams like the Cleveland Cavaliers.
They did. And what happened is earlier in the year, you hit it right on the coffin. The Pacers were not gelled together chemistry-wise yet. You brought in Rodney Stuckey, you brought in C.J. Miles. You didn't know what you were going to get. You didn't know how Vogel was going to work the rotation with this new team with Paul George out. And it took a while for them to get going. And also, going into the season, a lot of talk was about how Solomon Hill's going to be the next George Hill or Paul George, and he had his games where he had his moments, and then he had his games like last night where he couldn't hit water if he fell out of a boat.
Exactly.
So it was an up and down season for many players, but I think that I'm impressed with how Rodney Stuckey and C.J. Miles came on
and
this second half of this season.
C.J. Miles had some starting out issues with, like, health-wise, so that was another thing that kept him from getting going early. He had problems with, I guess he was off balance, with his eyes, suffering from, I believe Dwayne Wade has the same thing, from migraines, where it keeps him from seeing straight. So he said he was actually out there playing, and it looked like the goal was upside down, hanging upside down. So, he had some starting out issues, which probably could have helped the Pacers if he was fully healthy. So that's one thing that, I saw that could have helped them.
Right, and it could have for sure. And you look back and you look at the key guys that the Pacers needed. Again, George Hill missed about 30 games. Actually, he missed 40 games just about. And so that was irrelevant in a different team at the beginning of the year. Really, it was a different team from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. Okay, David West missed almost 20 games. And Roy Hibbert, he played most of the games, but again,
he missed about all of them.
But he almost missed about all of them as far as production, and that's what I want to talk about next here, is the guys that were together with this team, the starters, the veterans, David West, Roy Hibbert, and George Hill. Without Paul George in there, Stevenson gone. Talk about what you think these guys did together as far as how they gelled and tried to lead this team. What do you think?
George Hill took the leader position in this one, and
David he led the Pacers in points per game at 16, and he played out of all the relevant players, he played the least games. I mean.
Yeah, and David West, he's starting to slow down in his career.
You saw it last night.
Yeah, he got injured last night with an ankle injury, sprained it. So, George Hill, it was like me and Kyle like to say, it's Brucey's time to shine.
That's right.
And that's what
Brucey's
what George
time to
Hill.
Shine, babe.
Yeah. George Hill, it was his time to shine, and he came out and was productive, led the team, and with him coming back, he was, he helped everybody around him, not just himself. It made the team better. So Roy Hibbert, that's a different story.
Roy Hibbert.
Feel like he didn't even want to be there this year. But
I think it's time to move on for Mr. Roy Hibbert. Let's take a look at his stats here. For the big fellas, just not going to get it done. I think Rhett could give it a better shot in the NBA. Let's see. About as skinny as him. All right, let's see. About 10 points per game he averaged and 7 rebounds per game. That is not even close.
It went down in points a little bit. And on the field goal percentage, he actually shot 1% better.
Yeah, it went down. I mean, that 10 points a game it's ridiculous. It needs to be twice as much as that. And the rebounds,
4% too, or 4 minutes a game.
7 rebounds per game for a 7'2" center that is supposed to lead our team, being the big man. It's just not going to get it done. I mean, I don't know what else there is to say about it. It's just not enough from the big fella, and you saw it too many games this year where he's just not strong enough down low. And remember, I'm sure you do, going into this season, all the talk was how he was having work with Kareem and he's going to be the best center in the NBA, maybe even MVP.
Yeah.
And how did that work out? Not great.
Sounds like he got worse.
Yes, he hits declined.
Yeah, his blocks have went down. I believe his rebounds
points
have went
gone
down a little bit. Yeah.
He's on the decline, and you have to wonder if it's just time to move on. And you're right. There were times it looked like he's just not happy here in Indiana anymore. The team chemistry didn't look right. It might just be time to move on with him. I think we agree. And David West, you said that David West has had a decline too. He's getting older and injured, and they're both going to be free agents. And maybe it's time, as we talked about a couple shows ago, for the Pacers to make a big splash this offseason with the money they have. David West averaged almost 12 points per game, but again, not his usual numbers, the bad man that we're used to seeing, and so really
lowest numbers since 2004.
Yeah, he's getting older, and I think it's time for the Pacers to move on. Now George Hill showed what he can still do when he is more of a shooting guard and takes over in that aspect. You know, I am impressed, though. He did average 5 assists per game this year, so I felt like he did improve that a bit, but he is more of a shooter. And Rhett, if you keep George Hill, you have Paul George coming back, now you have Donald Sloan off the bench who showed his highs when he would come in, and the Pacers can make some moves and maybe try and get a true point guard in here. What do you think about that, of moving that rotation a little bit, maybe come this next season?
Well, you know, where would C.J. Miles fit in that? You talking about bringing him off the bench, or?
I guess it would just depend on who the Pacers can pick up in the offseason.
Yeah, well, you know, it would really just depend who they could pick up in the offseason, just like you said. But it's a tricky one. You know, I don't really know.
Yeah, I guess we'll have to see, and hey, that'll be something that will come on future shows as we can look forward to their next season. But let me go through a couple players here as we're talking about their season to see what you thought of some of these players. What did you think about Damjan Rudez?
I definitely not what we brought him in to really do. He definitely could not knock down three-pointers like I was expecting him to. He didn't.
Exactly.
He didn't play as much.
15 minutes per game, and averaged about 5 points per game.
Yeah.
Not what we brought him in for. Let me throw another guy out there, Jan Mahimi.
Oh yeah, it's time for him to hit the door. When we first signed him, he had a great jump shot, and you know, I remember pointing that out a lot back then. And now he's barely able to hit anything under the rim.
No, he really isn't. About 19 minutes per game, averaging 4 points per game.
Yeah.
Not going to get it done. How about Lavoy Allen?
Oh, I like Lavoy Allen, but he definitely needs. I think it's more of him not playing as much as he could.
17
I
minutes
think he has
per game
potential.
17 minutes per game is what he averaged, and he averaged 5 points.
How many games did he?
He played 63 games.
63 games.
So he missed about 20 games, but that's
what
still
was his
pretty
rebounds?
Solid. 5 points, 5 rebounds. He didn't come in much, and
bad.
he mainly came in, it seemed, when the Pacers were winning big later.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. I think Lavoy Allen brings some good rebounding capabilities for the Pacers. So I would agree with that. How about Chris Copeland? The man who was in this scuffle and in the hospital because of a poor decision, but overall his minutes way dropped, almost 17 minutes per game, but only averaged 6 points per game. I felt like he didn't play enough. What did you think about Chris Copeland this year?
Yeah, I don't think he played enough, but really I don't know if he fit into the rotation. With his type of defense. So I think that's what mainly Frank Vogel is worried about there. But I definitely agree that he did not get as much minutes as I expected him to. But, you know, CJ Miles stepped up in that 3-point area. So
he did.
Really,
he did. So 2 more players. How about C.J. Watson?
He was productive throughout. And well, he was injured quite a bit.
He was. He played 57 games, but he averaged 10 points per game.
Yeah, he didn't do bad, but he is getting older, and if the Indiana Pacers did keep him next year, I think that it would go down his points per game, because he is right around 32-ish. Is that correct, Kyle?
Yes, he's getting
right around that area.
Yeah, he's getting up there.
Yeah, so I think that his time is going to go down, but his average in the past 2 years did go up by 4 points. So but he did play more with the players being injured. So really, you don't know how a player is going to end up playing later on in the season or in the future. So I would say I wouldn't sign him back just due to the fact that he's getting older. And then you have the young gun, Donald Sloan, that I think that he is getting potential to, be a pretty decent backup.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with that. Last guy, Luis Scola. What did you think about Luis Scola? Only missed 1 game this year, played about 21 minutes, and averaged 9 points per game. And really, as of late, he played really well. I liked what Luis Scola brought. Now, he's getting older, but I thought that he played pretty well this season. What did you think of him?
Yeah, I think he played pretty well, too. He brings this type of energy that
the Pacers need.
Yes, and he has this strange type of play that I just can't even really describe, but
he has great footwork.
Yeah.
He's slow, but he's effective.
On the slow part, he gives it his all. When he goes out there, you can see him. He's a hustle player, and even though he is slow, he still goes out there and puts his full effort out. So
and he does, and he's a guy that I think the Pacers should look to keep, and it will be interesting as we've kind of gone through the Pacers roster and recap their season here. It's been a good one. That's about all we have for today, but lots of exciting things to come for the Indiana Pacers. Lots of moves to be expected to happen. In the next shows, we'll be able to be previewing their next season in the summer and free agency and NBA draft. A lot of exciting stuff to come. Unfortunately, the Pacers will be watching the playoffs this weekend from home. Not what we wanted, but we are proud of our Indiana Pacers and their fight this year, so hopefully they can come back for the 2015-2016 season better than ever, like the old Pacers we are used to seeing. All right, that is about all we have. So to recap what was talked on the show, we discussed the Pacers' last 5 games. We chatted about Paul George's short season, and we recapped Indiana's 2014 to 2015 season. Thank you for tuning into our show. Feel free to leave any comments. Tweet and retweet the show at Kyle M. Newman and at Rhett Hensley. We will be back at it next Wednesday at 8 Eastern Time. I'm Kyle Newman.
And I'm Rhett Hensley.
Have a good night. Go Pacers.
Go Pacers.